Hey everybody, I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by our good friends at Meriwether and Tharp. Glad to have you with us. Busy show for us. It's Stephen Lassen later on from Athlon Sports. He's the one that we talked about earlier this week who, at least in his top 50 players list, had Jamie Newman as the top quarterback in the SEC. We'll find out more about that from him and how Georgia compares to some of its top rivals in the 2020 season. Some interesting recruiting news, some of that coming from Jeff Sintel last night on Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. Dabo Swinney's put Georgia's name in his mouth over the last 24 hours. We'll tell you what he said as well. It's just going to be a fun show. BA Q&A on the way later on, too. It is all on the way as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Meriwether and Tharp, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Meriwether and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So we're still about 2 weeks away from the start of Georgia's spring practice, but around college football, a lot of spring practices have begun. And what the good news about that is you get just a little bit more college football news. For those of us who really love college football, this time of year can be kind of good because you got, LSU began, and Ed Orgeron had some interesting things to say. Clemson spring practice began. Dabo Swinney met with the media. And so in a way, it feels like a little bit of a college football season when you got these coaches starting practice, talking to reporters, and giving updates on things. It's just kind of nice to have a little bit of a college football news cycle spinning here for a couple of days. And it's actually something that Dabo Swinney said that I want to begin with on our program today, DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. Good to have you with us, because I reckon this must have been the first time that Swinney had spoken to reporters since it was announced that Georgia would open the 2021 season by playing Clemson in Charlotte. And Swinney, it's very interesting, is obviously excited about the game, but apparently not that excited. This is a very interesting comment from Dabo Swinney. It's a little longer than what we normally would play, but here is Dabo Swinney addressing yesterday, I think it was yesterday anyway, yesterday his thoughts on the Georgia-Clemson game. Here it is.
Many years where we could have done an opener or whatever and probably made more money from an athletic department standpoint, to be honest with you, but lose a game and only have 6 games. So I've really fought that my whole career, and we'll continue to do that. But this was a situation where you set these things out in advance, and then all of a sudden 21 was kind of an oddball year for us, and we really needed another game. It worked out, especially being able to go to Charlotte, because that's kind of been the formula we've had for a long time. And so Dan and I talked about it really back, I guess, in, summer. So it's been something they've been working on. But, I hate the fact that we lose a home game, because it's important to our community here. And it's exciting. You got an opportunity. It just worked out. We may not have done it for just another random team, but the fact that we had a chance to play Georgia, I think something that both fan bases will be really excited about. And obviously, it's a tough game. That's a hard opener. Hard to win those games. It'll be an exciting way to start it all off.
So I think there's a lot to unpack from what Swinney had to say there about playing Georgia. Nice respect paid to UGA with the final couple sentences in that comment there from Swinney. And I really think that both Georgia and Clemson deserve to be commended, because there is certainly an argument you can make that neither one of these teams really needs this game. I mean, Clemson, just by virtue of going undefeated, is going to make the college football playoff. Georgia, because it plays in the SEC. We haven't seen the SEC champion excluded from the playoff either. That really both these teams can punch their playoff ticket without having to play each other. The fact that they still want to, I think this makes this kind of a good thing. And I know that what Swinney touches on there is one of the same things that some Georgia fans have also referenced to, that, when you go play this game in Charlotte, it does cost you a home game. And I think at a certain point, you have to deal with kind of what's ideal compared to what's practical. And obviously the ideal situation would be able to add another home series between Clemson and get a chance to play one of those games, in Athens maybe in 2021 and going to Death Valley in some future year. But the obvious challenge with that is that you got to find 2 dates that work for both programs, and that makes things a lot harder than just the one date in 2021 and getting both sides in Charlotte for a neutral site game. So that's just kind of the practical reality of all of this. However, when you really listen closely in on Dabo Swinney there, the one thing that you come away with is something I kind of alluded to a moment ago, but probably need to spend a little bit more time on. Dabo Swinney sounds like a guy there who knows he doesn't have to play Georgia at the beginning of the 2021 season to make the college football playoff. And I think that's one of the reasons why, even though he says, hey, it's a big game, exciting game, and blah, 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 deep down, Dabo knows that his undefeated seasons that he's been putting together, playing a very mediocre schedule, mediocre may even be kind, that has been a real recipe for making the college football playoff. In fact, when Heather Dinich wrote about this the other day at ESPN.com about paths to the playoffs of the various teams, she basically mentioned that Clemson plays a soft schedule. People will continue to kind of bark and gripe at them about that, but as long as they go undefeated, they're still making the college football playoff. When you listen to Swinney talk there, it's pretty obvious that he knows that he's aware of that, and I think that's unmistakable by listening to those words. However, the unspoken context of Georgia playing Clemson, the subtext of all of this is that in college football there is a game within the game. That while making the college football playoff, all that might require is just having a really good record, undefeated season, or no worse than 11-1, that there's actually a competition going on for something else. There's a competition for attention. And really the competition for attention is almost separate to winning this year's national championship. It just makes it easier to win future national championships. Then in the competition for attention and notoriety and TV ratings and Q rating and all these other things, that you've got to play big games to do that. Because Clemson just being undefeated last year, I mean, think about this. We do a show where we talk college football. I do other shows on these same video channels where we talk college football. We would go almost the entire season and not really mention Clemson at all. Now, by the end of the year, they're in the college football playoff, and they're getting discussed the way you would expect them to by then. But when you're beating Wake Forest 56-0, you're beating whatever other ACC team by whatever margin, you're just not getting talked about very much. And while that may make it easier to make this year's college football playoff, that lack of attention makes it harder to make future college football playoffs. I'll give you a perfect example of this. A very good website, a website that I always enjoy going to, my kind of go-to schedule website, and this is not a plug or an advertisement, it's just a website that I enjoy, is fbsschedules.com. They put out a list this week of the top 9 most watched regular season games of the year. Now, I'm only going to highlight the top 5 here. Here are the 5 games that got the most eyeballs on them in the regular season. LSU, Alabama was 1. Ohio State, Michigan was 2. Alabama, Auburn was 3. Penn State, Ohio State was 4. And Notre Dame going to Georgia was number 5. Once again, this according to FBSschedules.com. Now, you see here traditional rivals like LSU, Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan, and you also see the big non-conference schedule game between Notre Dame and Georgia. And Kirby Smart, going back to National Signing Day, really alluded to that Notre Dame game being something that helped them with recruits, the atmosphere created for that, the fan attention that game got, the eyeballs on television, that chase for attention. Georgia has succeeded in doing that, not just in 2019, but in previous years as well. That's kind of in many ways the game within the game when it comes to college football, and Georgia's just been doing really well with that. Clemson's done well in a category that Georgia hasn't been in yet, multiple appearances in the college football playoff and winning national championships, but in a lot of ways, when it comes to television eyeballs and things like that, Georgia's cornered a portion of the market that Clemson hasn't gotten. So in a lot of ways, that ends up being the recipe for how these two teams get together, I believe, to start the 2021 season. You want to be in the playoff, you want to win national championships, but you want that attention as well. Attention is just currency in college football. Georgia's had a good bit of that, going to get even more of that in 2021. And the fact that Kirby Smart and Greg McGarity and the rest of the UGA staff here are so intent on being pioneers and leading the way to more aggressive scheduling in 2021 and beyond, I think for UGA fans, that ought to be considered a very good thing. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us. And thank you so much to our friends at Merriweather and Tharp for making it all possible. Of course, there are a lot of ways you can get in touch with us: video, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. That's every day at 10. Radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. By the way, no radio for us here today. We are preempted on the radio due to the Lady Dogs in the SEC tournament, and we certainly wish Joni Taylor and her crew well as they get rolling with that. Also, podcast form. I have a huge announcement, actually. Let me tell you this. My buddy Connor Riley has helped me out with this. A lot of you have been asking, and now we can say for sure, DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp today, now available on Spotify as a podcast. We've been available on SoundCloud and iTunes and the Google Podcast Player for a while. A lot of you, though, have kind of migrated towards Spotify as a podcast platform. It's a very fast-growing platform. It's probably weird that we weren't on there before now, but we should be on there today. So do me a favor. If you're a Spotify user, if that's a way that you listen to podcasts on Spotify. Let us know if you found DawgNation Daily on there. We should be up and running on Spotify, and huge thanks to the very youthful and cutting-edge, tech-savvy Connor Riley for helping us get going there on Spotify for DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. And speaking of them, the divorce process, let's face it, nobody wants to go through it. And if you are going through it, you know what a pain that is. I mean, literally and figuratively. It causes you pain. It hurts to be going through this. But the good news is that Meriwether and Tharp can help you. They can help you, and you don't even have to be a client. One of my favorite things about them, and every time I talk to Bob Tharp and my friends over there at Meriwether and Tharp, this is always one of the things that I bring up. The generosity with which they approach the divorce process, whether it be blog posts, podcasts, things like that, not just issues of how to handle divorce, but how to make your marriage better. They tweet this kind of stuff all the time about how you can kind of put yourself in a position so that you can avoid ever having to have the divorce conversation. I'm just a big, big fan of Meriwether and Tharp, and I would invite you to check out their free resources, talk to them for a free initial consultation, and then if, unfortunately, you find yourself in a situation where divorce is the next step for you, then you're going to want them as an advocate on your side. They're your source for Georgia divorce. You can find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. That's theatlantadivorceteam.com. That'll get you in touch with my friends at Meriwether and Tharp. All right, we got an edition of the BA Q&A coming up today. Your chance to sound off on the latest stuff involving Georgia football. Let me give you the questions here quickly. I'll explain more throughout the show, the relevance of the questions, but here's what I'd love to have you weigh in on, whether it be on Twitter at DawgNation Daily, in our comments section when we post the podcast at DawgNation.com later on today, obviously live on video as well. Here they are very quickly. Which non-conference opponent are you most excited to see UGA play, or which one do you wish the Dogs would schedule? You can weigh in on that. Is Jamie Newman the SEC's top quarterback? I want you to weigh in on that for the BA Q&A today. And then finally, which SEC program will be the biggest threat to UGA over the next 10 years? And no, that does not have to be an SEC East team, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. By the way, speaking of Jamie Newman as the top SEC quarterback, someone who's at least suggested that is a possibility is Stephen Lassen from Athlon Sports. We'll talk to him coming up in just a couple of minutes on our program today. Before that, I want to go around the doghouse. And if you were listening and watching last night on Before the Edges presented by Kroger, really good interview that Jeff Sentell did with 2022 quarterback prospect Gunnar Stockton. And there was something that Stockton said during that interview that got my mind really spinning about what the future of UGA recruiting might look like, and an opportunity to take advantage of something that's kind of fallen in UGA's lap that I hope it really will truly take advantage of. Let me let you hear Gunnar Stockton on his thoughts on his recruiting process right now, including how he feels about UGA a couple of years out of his arrival on campus somewhere anyway. Here is Gunnar Stockton from Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger.
Just the relationship aspect of making sure I feel at home, and just knowing that I would fit in there.
How do you feel about Georgia? What's the relationship like with Kirby?
I mean, anytime, going to Georgia, it's your hometown state, and it would be really cool if I went there.
So listen, I think that's really interesting to hear Stockton say, hey, man, UGA is the in-state school. Now, that's not a binding referendum. That doesn't mean that he's going to go to Georgia, nor does it mean that he views UGA as his favorite necessarily. I think Georgia's in that conversation. We'll hear more from Jeff on that in a moment. But my point on all this is we've seen a very interesting development in the state within, say, the last decade or so. Georgia has kind of become a bit of a hotbed for quarterbacks, whereas if you want to go back, say, 20 years ago in the past, I don't know that was necessarily the case. Great defensive linemen, almost always. Really good running backs, yeah, probably so. Great quarterback state? No, you probably look to California or Texas or Florida as a better state for quarterbacks overall. But my gosh, when you think about Jake Fromm, when you think about Justin Fields, when you think about Trevor Lawrence, when you think about Brock Vandagriff, commit to Georgia for the class of 2021, you really all of a sudden start thinking about Georgia becoming a state where quarterback play has been pretty impressive, and the best names in the sport, in a lot of ways, it seems like lately they've been kind of hailing from the Peach State. So Georgia, having had Jake Fromm, in possession right now of the commitment for Brock Vandagriff, wouldn't it be nice to think that Georgia could utilize that, lean on that to tell Gunnar Stockton, hey, for you, big-time QB in the class of 2022, in-state quarterbacks stay home. That's the tradition. That's what you do. Now, that didn't used to be the case. Deshaun Watson went to Clemson, Trevor Lawrence went to Clemson, and on you could go. But that's not the way things are anymore. In-state quarterbacks are going to stay home. They're going to play for their in-state school. And how nice would that be to say that Georgia can start to put that lineage of quarterbacks together of guys from the state of Georgia? you truly might not have to look much further than your own state, your own borders, to find yourself a good quarterback in each and every cycle. At least that's what the recent cycles would have kind of indicated to us on that. Now, as far as how how Stockton kind of views his recruiting situation right now, on last night's edition of Before the Hedges presented by Kroger, Jeff Sintel went into a little bit more detail about that.
I think he could be able to make his decision likely before the start of his junior year. I do think that's possible. Maybe even be a little earlier than that. South Carolina, North Carolina, Clemson, Georgia. Those feel like the schools that I think are really in it there for Gunnar Stockton. Oklahoma's in there a little bit now because I think the family might want to check out Oklahoma.
So fun to think, even though Georgia's got some pretty stiff competition for Stockton services, fun to think that we may not be that far away from kind of a summertime announcement from him. I get the feeling, whether it be 2021 or 2022, the recruiting storylines and battleground, that is really about to heat up. And, of course, you get more of that each week on Before the Hedges presented by Kroger, also now available as a podcast. SoundCloud, Spotify, coming soon on the Apple Podcast player, and, of course, every Wednesday night live at 6 p.m. on the DawgNation video channels. And Jeff Sintel will be with us tomorrow here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp as well. All right, really good to have you with us here today. We'll get a lot more of your thoughts and comments in our BA Q&A later on. Some interesting stuff going on around the SEC that I want to get to. But for now, though, more on Georgia and the UGA players that showed up in the Athlon Sports preseason top 50 list. Let's talk to the guy who wrote that, Stephen Lassen from Athlon Sports. I'm a huge fan of Athlon Sports. I've been a reader of the magazine for as long as I can remember. I love to go to athlonsports.com as well because they, like me, enjoy doing off-season college football content, and one of the guys that produces a lot of that is Stephen Lassen. He joins us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp here today. Steve, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate you spending some of it with us.
Hey, thanks for having me on. It's great to talk to you.
So I guess let me ask you this to begin with on a more serious note before we get to the college football. I think Athlon's based in Nashville. I don't know if you live in Nashville or not. I guess it's appropriate to say, how are you guys doing? I know it's been a rough week for Nashville after the tornado and just sort of sad and tragic stories kind of coming out of that. What's the story there on the ground?
Yeah, we are based in Nashville. You know, fortunately for us, our office was just a couple miles away from the impact in East Nashville, and just to the east of Nashville as well. So our office and our employees were pretty fortunate. My co-host on our podcast, Braden Gall, his house was just a couple of blocks away from where it hit in East Nashville. So there's a lot of recovery going on. Unfortunately, some people lost their life too. So very deadly and also just a very sad situation. But Nashville has been very resilient with the floods and past tornadoes in East Nashville. And that's kind of where we're at right now, is just trying to put the pieces back together. But fortunately for me personally, we avoided major damage.
Of course, my words are a small consolation, but please pass on to everyone there just how much that city is in our thoughts and prayers. Obviously, around the SEC, everyone's big fans of Music City. They love making that trip to Nashville when they get a chance to. We all have great affection for the town, and obviously, we'll continue to pray for you guys and your friends, family, I'm sure, as you guys try to pull through all this.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. It's been a tough week for a lot of people, and I think a lot of us are in shock because, we see these areas that we go to, and it's kind of, as I was driving into the office yesterday, you see the damage, and, it hits you. You see this on TV, and you see it in the news, but when it hits a place that you're kind of your hometown you're used to seeing, that's when it really sinks in. So I appreciate the good thoughts there.
So a clumsy transition to a happier story. I really enjoyed your list, top 50 players in college football, kind of a preseason early look at that at Athlon Sports. When we post the show, I'll put another link to that up when we post the show later on here today. But I thought one of the interesting talking points to come out of that was you had Jamie Newman, the transfer quarterback at Georgia, coming in at number 39. Totally agree with your assessment that he may be among the more difficult players to evaluate because new player in a new spot, kind of conflicting data about the way that he performed last year at Wake Forest. But beyond that, what I thought was the most interesting is that Newman was the only SEC quarterback to make your top 50 list. Does that mean I should take Athlon Sports to say that they think Newman is the best quarterback in the SEC to start this season? How do you kind of view the signal callers right now, and I guess Newman's place in this league?
it is absolutely impossible right now to rank the quarterbacks coming back in the SEC next season because there's so much turnover with Joe Burrow, with Tua leaving, and then there's kind of that next tier of quarterbacks like Bo Nix, like Kellen Mond. We're waiting to see if they take a step forward. And then, of course, you have some battles across the league next season. I just think coming into the year, in just a big picture sense, with the uncertainty at quarterback and some of the other losses in the league, it kind of says to me that maybe the league is a little bit more wide open than we're used to seeing. So we looked at all the quarterbacks in the SEC and kind of our rough ranking of where they would come in. I think you have to consider Kyle Trask because he had a good season last year. Curious to see if Emory Jones pushes for the job. But for now, we settled on Jamie Newman just simply because, I like what he did at Wake Forest. He got off to a fast start, really productive season. I am curious to see how the second half of the season, the reasons for the injuries, the supporting cast was banged up around him, and now he goes to Georgia where he has a new offensive line, some uncertainty at receiver, new play caller. So there's a lot of new around Jamie Newman, and I'm curious to see how it all plays out. But based upon what he did at Wake Forest from a production standpoint, and also just some of the advanced analytics really liked his ability to push the ball downfield into tight windows. So we think Jamie Newman the best quarterback in the SEC right now, kind of as we get into spring practice.
So obviously the overwhelming majority of the people who are watching and listening right now are Georgia fans, but occasionally we will have some Florida fans who are good enough to check in on us, and they're always quick to kind of tout Kyle Trask because he is a returning starter, because at least from a statistical standpoint, the numbers looked okay for him last year. Ultimately, what was it for you? Was it simply the presence of Emory Jones and I guess maybe a lack of certainty that Trask will hold on to that job? Ultimately, what was it for you that caused, at least in the preseason, to kind of push the pause button on Trask?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We looked at both of these quarterbacks, and then we also considered, should we project Mac Jones, Miles Brennan? We think it's probably a little bit too early for both of them to be the top quarterback in the SEC. So we looked at Newman and we looked at Kyle Trask, but when we looked at Trask, certainly the numbers were very good last season, and I think if he's the starter this year with the talent Florida has coming back at receiver, there's some turnover, but still some good players there. The offensive line brings back 4 starters. There's a lot to like there, but also there's the Emory Jones factor. And, whether it's fair or not, when you start kind of thinking about all SEC voting at the end of the year, production matters. And if you have Emory Jones playing a lot, that could eat into Kyle Trask numbers. So we'll see as we get deeper into the spring kind of what the kind of proportion of snaps goes to. But I just think right now we just looked at Jamie Newman being more secure as the starter. And also we like the talent, and we like the talent around him. And we think if everything comes together, he could have a really nice season at Georgia.
Let me bounce another theory off you on a different position. Richard LeCounte, the Georgia safety, made your top 50 list. LeCounte's obviously, I think, a very impressive player. I think it was a good thing for Georgia that he chose to come back for senior season as opposed to giving the NFL a try. However, I've also said, Stephen, that I think for the Georgia defense to be as good as it can be this year, you need the big year from LeCounte, but maybe you need someone from that front seven to emerge as this defense's true best player, a little bit like a Roquan Smith would have been for this team back in 2017, that you love having the great defensive back. Georgia's had a couple of years where the defensive back was probably the unit's best player, but to be as dynamic as possible, if you're doing a top 50 end-of-season list, then you need a Georgia linebacker to show up there, a Georgia defensive lineman to show up there for this defense to be as impactful as it possibly can be. How would you respond to that?
Absolutely. I think one of the hardest things about doing all conference teams and best players is sometimes you're evaluating kind of based upon what you see each week, and you're evaluating based upon stats and pro potential and a lot of different things. Georgia, they rotate so many players on that defense, and from a statistical standpoint, you're not going to see the big numbers maybe you would see if they were a full-time player. But at the same time, it's incumbent on us, if we're ranking the players, to kind of look at, hey, even this guy may be playing 60% of the snaps, but he's still making an impact. And I think the question is, can Georgia get someone to go to that level? And I like what I've seen out of Jordan Davis at times. I think coming back this season, he could be one of the SEC's better defensive linemen. I am curious to see at linebacker who steps up, because there is a lot of talent. And if Georgia can find one or two guys to get after the quarterback with a little bit more frequency this season, I mean, the defense was already good, but it could go from good to great if you can upgrade those sacks from 30, maybe to around 50 or so.
When we have someone who doesn't cover UGA full-time on a regular basis on the show, it's always kind of interesting to get more of a big-picture perspective outside the bubble, so to speak. And I thought it was interesting that on your list, not in the top 50, but at least getting consideration, was Georgia wide receiver George Pickens. And on this show, we've obviously touted Pickens. I thought he had a great year last year. Obviously had a couple of off-field concerns that kept him off the field a couple of times late for UGA. But more than anything, I'm just kind of curious of, how nationally known do you think that Pickens is, or maybe regionally known, maybe a better way to say that, amongst, folks who, care about the SEC. We around here think he could be a big-time breakout player. The Georgia receivers last year left a lot to be desired. I don't think that was Pickens' fault. I thought Pickens had a very good freshman season. When you guys in the Athlon office is kind of kicking around college football topics, is Pickens a guy that people who follow the SEC know about? And is he a guy that you think that the folks who are not Georgia fans, who cover the entire country or cover the entire conference, you think he's a guy that's on their radar right now?
That's a great question. I know we actually looked at George Pickens as making our top 50. He was in the discussion starting around 40. And a lot of it was projection. I said this on our podcast a couple weeks ago. I think if I'm buying stock in a receiver this season, I'm buying stock in George Pickens. His physical talent, his production as a freshman, and in Georgia's offense under Todd Monken, and if Jamie Newman's able to push the ball downfield, George Pickens is going to have a monster statistical season. So I've got him near the top of my ballot right now. Jamar Chase, Devonta Smith, Jalen Waddle at Alabama. The receivers in the SEC are loaded, but I think when you start talking about maybe fringe All-America consideration, I've got him there this season. I think he's off the radar probably from a national perspective, but I think fans who followed recruiting and follow the SEC know how good he is and know with more opportunities, he's a guy that's going to have a breakout season. And I think he will, and that's why we almost had him in our top 50. We're just big George Pickens fans this season, and think he's going to have a breakout year on a national level.
Let me squeeze in one more thing, and of course you've been generous with your time. I want to be fair and balanced here for a moment, because on the one hand, it seems like Alabama is ripe for the picking right now. They lost 2 games last season, didn't make the college football playoff. Tua Tagovailoa is gone. A couple of those great wide receivers are gone. And yet on your list, Alabama's got 5 of the top 20 players in the country to start the year, 6 of the top 30. Georgia only has 2 on the list. From a top-end talent standpoint, is Alabama still that far ahead of the rest of the conference, including UGA, who has to go there in September?
That's a good question. I think Georgia, from a roster perspective in overall talent, is starting to catch Alabama. I think we did the roster rankings on our site a couple of weeks ago, and I think it was, both teams are now averaging, 3 or just under 3 in national recruiting ranking average over the last 5 seasons. So from an overall talent perspective, Georgia is catching Alabama. I think where Alabama has more certainty right now, they just have more star power. Georgia's rebuilding along the offensive line. DeAndre Swift left for the NFL, and I think we talked about the defense. I think Georgia has great players on defense, but the fact they rotate so many players, there's breakout candidates kind of at every level. Alabama just has more certainty right now, and I think you look at Najee Harris, Alex Leatherwood, Patrick Surtain. They just have more star power right now. But I think in terms of overall roster, Georgia may not have the guys on this list right now, but I think the depth and I think the overall talent is there. And I think for Georgia this season, much of it's going to come down to Jamie Newman and the offense. And I think, of course, that trip to Jacksonville and to play Florida, that game will decide the SEC East this year.
As it should, I guess. Steve, as I said before, I'm a big fan of Athlon Sports. Tell folks how they can find the work that you're doing online and the off-season content that you're good enough to provide for us.
Sure. You can follow us on Twitter at Athlon Sports. and you can go to athlonsports.com. We've got college football coverage every day of the year to keep you busy. Getting ready for the upcoming season. We're also working on our 2020 magazines, SEC and National. So those will be coming out in May, and you can check them out on the newsstand or buy one from the website once they get out, too.
Sounds good, Steve. Thanks so much for your time. We'll look forward to having you back on as the magazine gets closer to hitting the newsstands.
Anytime. Thanks for having me on.
All right, good stuff there, Steve Lassen from Athlon Sports. And you want to talk about a guy who knows his audience. I mean, what a nice compliment you gave to George Pickens there. All-American type words being kicked around. And, listen, I do think it's fun to have Pickens kind of growing in the limelight that way. And as I said on one of our shows earlier this week, Pickens back in December or, whatever day I guess it was January 1st when the Sugar Bowl's played, he kind of credited Jake Fromm for helping kind of get him ready to go during the season, pushing him during practice. It is kind of funny to think that in a lot of ways, Pickens may be in the opposite role with Jamie Newman, a guy who has played, a guy who's starting to develop a little bit of a reputation for himself, national websites like Athlon paying attention to him. All of a sudden now Pickens may have to help Newman's transition to the SEC, much the same way that Jake Fromm helped Pickens transition to college football a year ago. Quarterback, wide receiver chemistry is very important, and last year it was the quarterback bringing along the receiver. This year, in terms of being a dependable target, it may be the receiver's job to help bring along the quarterback. And I guess one more thing I'll say about this, I think I find myself ending up saying some version of this almost every single year, but when it comes to preseason lists, there's nothing wrong with only having 2 guys in the top 50. That's what Georgia has right now. But when you think about winning a national championship, you can't have 2 in the top 50 at the end of the year. Alabama thought to have 6 of the top 30, as Steven says. A lot of that's due to the fact that these guys already have relatively famous names. So the job of a Jordan Davis, the job of a George Pickens, the job of a Nolan Smith, who I've talked about this week, the job of some of these guys, probably Azeez Ojulari, Nakobe Dean, you'd add them into this discussion. They got to go out there and make themselves famous during the season, and if so, when that top 50 list comes out at the end of the year, a lot more Georgia guys will be on it, which ultimately should propel UGA to the potential of championship success during this season as well.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that with Steve Lassen. I thought it was good stuff from Athlon Sports. I like lists. I like top 50 players. I like top 25 teams. You put out a college football list, and I'm going to spend some time with it and have a good time with it. So good stuff there by Steve, and we'll make sure to have him on the show again soon. For now, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of our friends at Royal Caribbean. And I want to tell you about one of my favorite things at Royal Caribbean, the way that they amplify ships that maybe you've been on before. They completely reimagine them, and they make them bigger and better than ever. One of the examples of that's the Oasis of the Seas. Here's some of the things they've added to Oasis of the Seas. So if you've been on Oasis in the past, it's different than you've ever experienced before. Ultimate Abyss has been added. It's the tallest slide at sea. It's a dry slide. It plunges 10 stories down, so a real thrill ride opportunity right there at sea on the Oasis of the Seas. Playmaker Sports Bar and Arcade. We love that around here. Who wouldn't love a sports bar out in the middle of the ocean? It's just fun. Good stuff there. Of course, all kinds of like nightlife and entertainment things. There's Bionic Bar. I haven't done this. I want to. When we show the video, it's like the robotic arms like making the drink, and it's just kind of amazing. It's like something out of Star Wars or something. It's really cool stuff. So I know you need a vacation. It's the time of year where it's time to start planning these vacations. So contact your travel advisor. Let them tell you about all the really cool stuff for Oasis of the Seas, or let me recommend one of my friends to you. It's the Cruise and Vacation Authority. You can give them a call at 800-326-4971. It's 800-326-4971. Of course, please tell them you heard about them with us right here on DawgNation Daily. And as we're cruising on the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, off the top of the program, I mentioned the FBS schedules, a list of the top 9 highest-rated regular season games from a year ago. Georgia was on that list, number 5 against Notre Dame. I thought it was also interesting, I guess, so 5 of the top 9 games involved SEC teams. LSU involved in a few of these. Alabama involved in a few of these. Credit where credit's due, though. You know who else showed up a lot was the Big Ten. Ohio State and Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. Obviously, Ohio State's a pretty big draw here. But when you really look at a list like this, you kind of see who's doing big business in college football and who's not. It's a bunch of SEC. It's a bunch of Big Ten. Texas was on there twice. Army, Navy. And that's it. No Pac-12. For the most part, no Big 12 that doesn't involve Texas, no ACC whatsoever. The big business in college football is SEC, Big 10, a little bit of Texas, and Army and Navy at the end of the year. And that's pretty much it. And I think the future of college football has to take this into consideration. I've said this before. It's time to stop treating some of these leagues as if they're playing at the same level. And by the way, for those of you that go around kind of like bashing the Big 10 all the time, I mean, honestly, in comparison to some of these other leagues, the Big 10 is a lot less worthy of criticism than the ACC, the Big 12, and the Pac-12. I mean, the Big 10, not at the full level. They got like a gazillion teams. But at the top level, in terms of drawing interest and in terms of putting guys in the league, I mean, they're not doing so bad. So you'll notice that with me. I'm pretty harsh on the Pac-12. I'm pretty hard on the Big 12. Obviously, we kick around the ACC. You don't hear a lot of Big 10 criticism from me because they're the one league that seems to be of the similar mind to the SEC and seems to be trying to sort of run this thing as a big business, much the same way that the SEC is. Speaking of the Southeastern Conference, cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. LSU has started spring practice, and boy, Ed Orgeron opened his press conference yesterday with some pretty high praise for Miles Brennan. Apparently, he feels very confident that Brennan's going to be the guy for LSU this season. I am really skeptical of that. And the reason why is we've actually been covering and talking about Brennan on this show for a number of years. This was a guy that had a chance to win the starting job prior to Joe Burrow's arrival, and he didn't do it. He had some bad scrimmages and some things like that. If Brennan had been a good quarterback, there's a very good chance that Joe Burrow never comes to LSU. He came to LSU from Ohio State because the starting quarterback job was open. No one could step up. No one could win that. No one can earn that. And listen, working with Jamar Chase and, working with everything else that's kind of going on there, there's obviously a chance that Brennan's now ready, a little older to have more success. But this is a guy that LSU's tried to turn to before, and they could not give him the job. By the way, speaking of LSU, another piece of interesting news here, Dare Rosenthal, who's an LSU offensive lineman and a guy that, they've lost 4 starters off last year's offensive line. Rosenthal is expected to be like the starting left tackle or whatever, but apparently he's going to be away from the team during spring practice. Now, Orgeron said yesterday that he's expecting to return back during the summer, but not going to be there during spring practice. So LSU for the spring is going to be working with an entirely brand new offensive line, which is a little bit of a scary thing. And for whatever reason, it also kind of seems like LSU just sort of deals with these spring absences more than other programs do. Arden Key missed spring practice there a couple of years ago, ended up coming back and playing. I don't really know what it means necessarily, but it seems like there are 2 things that happen at LSU far more than anybody else, anywhere else. Folks break in that stadium. Somebody breaks into Death Valley like every month. You can read the stories online on the Louisiana newspapers. And then players just miss spring practice there. They treat it like an AAU basketball or something. It's like you never quite know who's going to be the full participation list for LSU spring practice. They just have a very different way of doing things for the most part there. But listen, they're the reigning champs, so one way or another, it's working. Let me do a couple more things really quickly. Speaking of LSU, Rashard Lawrence, speaking at the NFL Scouting Combine last week, former LSU star, predicted that he thinks that LSU is about to get a lot more wins against Alabama. I think he said something effective, going to win like 8 of the next 10 or something like that. I forget what the exact number was, but he's talking big about LSU beating Alabama after having not really done that a lot in recent years. And I guess it kind of brings to mind for me, that this is the corner that Georgia was hoping to stand on, being the SEC program that vanquishes Alabama, that pushes Nick Saban into retirement, that kind of ends that dynasty, so to speak. And unfortunately, a couple of programs have kind of crowded into what was supposed to be Georgia's corner. Nationally, obviously, Clemson has done that. They've beaten him in the playoffs a couple of times. And now in the conference, LSU has done that. LSU really slapped him around on the field last year, and then Ed Orgeron said what he said once the game was over with, kind of boasting about the victory and claiming, all kinds of other things that LSU was going to do to Alabama. I think it's imperative on Georgia's part to kind of reclaim that. When the Saban dynasty comes to an end at Alabama, and eventually it's going to, I think a bad thing for UGA would be to see that come to an end at someone else's hand, either Dabo Swinney at Clemson or Ed Orgeron at LSU. That's one of the reasons why not only have I predicted Georgia to beat Alabama twice this season, I hope that's what happens. You almost need for that to happen so Georgia can be the program that gets the credit for actually ending the Saban career, because as it stands right now, it looks like it's going to be Orgeron or it looks like it's going to be Swinney. unless Georgia can sort of step up and do that this year, and there's a very good chance that they will and might. One more thing here as we finish up our cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Top 50 list from Athlon Sports. We've talked about the Alabama guys. We've talked about the Georgia guys. Let me give you a few more of the SEC names that pop up here. 2 LSU guys in the top 5, Jamar Chase and Derek Stingley. No surprise there. Interesting to see Trey Smith, the Tennessee offensive lineman who could have gone to the NFL draft, chose not to, who's dealt with a number of health-related issues. Interesting to see him show up here at number 26. That's a Tennessee offensive lineman that has a chance to be pretty good. Obviously, Wanya Morris, you know him. Darnell Wright, you know him. Trey Smith coming back to health here. There's a chance. There's, what's his name? Brandon Kennedy, the former Alabama transfer, is still there, I believe, as well. There's a good bit of experience, good bit of talent on that Tennessee offensive line. That's something to think about and know when it comes to the SEC here this season. And then a couple other names. Kylan Hill, the Mississippi State running back, comes at number 49. Kyle Pitts, the only Florida name on the list on either side of the ball, but not as a top 50 player, as kind of an also receiving votes guy. And then a Kentucky offensive lineman, Darian Kennard, got some attention there as well. And we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of our friends at Royal Caribbean. And if you don't mind, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp today, for those of us watching on video, can we throw the BA Q&A questions back up here again? Give folks a chance to weigh in on that today. I'll read these to you, and we got a little bit of time for a couple of responses here. Question number 1, which non-conference opponent are you most excited to see UGA play or wish it would play? That's in honor of the Clemson talk off the top of the show. As I discussed with Steven Lasson, will Jamie Newman be the SEC's top quarterback? And which program is the biggest threat to UGA over the course of the next 10 years? The reason why I asked that question is because of what Rashard Lawrence said about he thinks LSU is going to be beaten up on Alabama. Are we really in a scenario now where maybe Georgia's looking at LSU more frequently than it's looking at Alabama or a Florida in terms of its chief competition around the SEC. I'll also say this as well, by the way. One of the things I've been having a good time doing is putting all of these on the forum at forum.dawgnation.com. We've been having a good time taking some comments on there and talking about that. I didn't get these questions up on the forum before the start of the show today, but I'll make sure we do that here pretty soon. Blake Pillsbury, by the way, on Facebook says that Clemson's the one that he's the most excited about. Blake, thanks for checking in on that topic, and I can kind of understand why that is. I've said before that I think there's room for Georgia to play both like out-of-region games. Notre Dame's a classic example of that. That was good business for those two programs to get together. But something about playing your regional rivals, I think, is really fun, too. There's a practical reality to Georgia playing Clemson, the fact that they're competing in recruiting so much and that Clemson's got this nice national brand from having been in the college football playoff. You can take them down a peg by beating them on the field. That's a really good thing. But I think there's also something to be said for, hey, as a child of the 80s, I grew up with these two teams playing all the time. The fact that's going to happen a lot in future years, I think that's really fun for the future. What is not so fun, and by the way, we'll continue to take your BA Q&A comments. Hit me up on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. You can put them in the comment section live here on video. You can put them in the comment section when we post the show at the podcast at DawgNation.com. Just hit us up on all of that. We'll take those for you here today. But what's a lot less fun for me is to talk about Georgia basketball. A bad loss last night to Florida. Not a lot of energy, seemingly, in Stegman Coliseum. Not a great night for Anthony Edwards. Ultimately, my feeling on Georgia basketball and what this season meant and what it was all about is not going to be decided, I think, until a few years from now. I mean, if you want to go back and listen to us before Edwards got here, I don't know that at any point in time on this show we predicted this to be an NCAA tournament team. In fact, I think we've cited lots of examples where freshmen haven't made a huge impact on a particular season. But does it bring more recruits here for the future? That's the most important question. And by the way, Gator Hater Updater in football, 1,223 days. We'll see you tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down, and we'll get more of your BA Q&A questions answered here on the show today. Of course, we always appreciate that, and we appreciate our friends at R.S. Andrews making the show possible. Story after story, they've been delivering smiles, and they can deliver one for you. I'll give a water heater example. Now, we talked about hot showers yesterday, but if yours goes out, and many instances, they can replace that the same day. So that's good peace of mind right there. Good, quick, quality work. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. We're just big fans of R.S. Andrews. You can find them online and become a big fan yourself by checking out rsandrews.com. Let me get this here. Somebody said this. Hold on. Let me go to Facebook here for a moment. Matt Rukavina says a writer from The Athletic was on Firebomb yesterday saying Southern Cal may go to the Big 12. Imagine that. Yeah, I think that was Andy Staples, I think, is the one that wrote that. We'd obviously kind of kicked around the idea here of the SEC shouldn't let geography stop it from conference expansion. If we're doing this again, by we, I mean all of us that care about college football, if we're doing this again, then you got to go get the biggest and best schools you can get. And if we're going to be playing NFL football in London every year, why not play SEC football in Los Angeles from a travel standpoint? It ain't that different. So, yeah, I mean, ultimately, I'm not sure the Big 12 is going to exist 5 years from now. So joining that league, I'm not sure makes a lot of sense. When you it's almost like USC would be bringing the level of fame and notoriety necessary for that league to survive as it stands right now. From a true big business standpoint, it's about Texas, and that's about it. Even Oklahoma, when it's not playing Texas, doesn't have a whole lot of, kind of what you think of. And, I mean, they don't show up on these highly rated games lists when they're not playing a team like Texas. So the Big 12 needs a school like USC probably to survive for the long haul. But ultimately, why would you go be someone else's, life raft? Why would you go be someone else's mechanism for salvation? Why not come to the SEC if you're USC and kind of feed off the thriving, growing economy that's already in place? That'd be my feeling on that anyway. What else? Jacob O'Neill on the subject of getting 1,000 shout-outs. I'm not sure who that's directed to. Jennifer Caldwell-Sperlin on the situation in Nashville. Yeah, really sad. Just hate that. We all love Nashville around here. Love it. And it's just a shame to see, kind of what they're dealing with. But I have no doubt Nashville's going to come back bigger than better than before. And for all the families who've been touched by this, obviously, we give every thought, every prayer we possibly can. Robert Reynolds, thanks for checking in. I know sometimes you can be busy at work. We appreciate you being here. Oh, are y'all saying that I play favorites with Matt Rukavina? I don't think I play favorites with anybody. I don't think. Now, I will say this, is that sometimes I may have a tendency to, when someone like references me in, when someone references me in their comment, maybe I have a tendency to notice that first. Maybe Matt does that. And so obviously we're all, kind of attracted to our own name. So maybe that's what that is. But I don't feel like I play favorites to anybody. As much as I bounce around in these different comment sections, try to talk to different people, even people who criticize me, I feel like I do a pretty good job of trying to get in on some of that kind of stuff. Let me pull up YouTube here for a moment. I feel like I'm pretty good at casting a wide net for my comments. By the way, we'd love to continue to have you weigh in on our BA Q&A topic today. Andy Hall says it's a room full of trollers. Yeah, so here's the thing about YouTube. Like, we don't really block really anybody, and we've blocked like a couple spam things before, but we don't really block anybody on YouTube. But if somebody's just like driving you crazy, you should personally block them. I mean, for the most part, I'm pretty pro free speech as much as I possibly can be. That means that I'm not going to restrict a lot of people, even if they're being critical of me or being critical of Georgia or whatever. But if someone's impacting your ability to enjoy the comment section, you should definitely block them. You should definitely block them. Heath Hatcher, thank you for the kind words. Heath, I really appreciate that. It's very nice. It's very nice. Very nice of you to say, Heath. I appreciate that. Mike R. says the West Coast too far away. So the funny thing about Georgia fans is they seem to like the travel, right? I mean, even in previous eras, you had tons of Georgia fans that went to Tempe to see Arizona State. I believe it was in 2008. A good number of fans went to Boulder to play Colorado, I think in 2010. Georgia fans have kind of been okay with the travel. Now, does every SEC team want to do that? Maybe not, but UGA fans, for the most part, have seemed to kind of enjoy that. 404 Dog for Life. I don't know what you're referencing. I have to say I don't know what you're referencing. Christy, thanks for the kind words. So whatever picture you're referencing, I actually did not see this one. I do see a lot of the online stuff, but I did not see that. Brian Kephart says, we in Nashville appreciate all the support. Pretty rough in areas, but we'll get through it. Go Dogs. Hope everyone has a blessed day. Brian, thanks for checking in to let us know that. Memphis Dog says that he believes that Texas A&M and LSU will fight for second place in the SEC West. I really do think that A&M is going to be one of the stories this year. I think A&M is going to be one of the stories. What else is going on? Chevron Hannah says Oklahoma can't hang with the big boys. That's been proven since the college football playoff. I actually completely agree with Chevron on that. And they're not easy to beat. We saw that with Georgia in 2017. They can score enough points that they're not easy to beat, but ultimately, whether it be Georgia leaning on them or Alabama, LSU, simply just sort of blitzing them from the word go, they don't recruit well enough to beat the top SEC teams. They just don't. Groon D says the invasion of LSU did not go as planned. Yeah, that's true. But here's the thing, Groon. I'm thankful for having a good time, even when things don't work out the way that I want it to. I'm glad I'm not one of these people that, doesn't ever make a trip to somewhere like Baton Rouge because, my team may lose, or, doesn't go to, wherever because, listen, it's the same thing with anything. I'm going to get out and enjoy my life, live my life. And, 20,000 or so Georgia fans. We had, hundreds and hundreds of people that came to our event that week in downtown New Orleans. It's possible for me to still have a good memory of something, even if ultimately the reason why I went didn't turn out so well. Georgia did not play well against LSU. It's one of the worst games of the Kirby Smart era, I think. And yet, it was still a pretty fun time. And ultimately, this is about entertainment. This is about having a good time. And I'm glad I got a chance to experience that. George Wrigley, boy, this is a bold prediction. He's got Cochran as the defensive coordinator next year. That'd be quite a career development right there. That's a great bold projection. A great bold prediction. Joel Moody's got another big bold prediction. He's got Pickens over 1,000 yards, and he leads the team in touchdowns. I'd love to see that. Gregory Nowak says that my take on Miles Brennan was overly negative. He says that he's going to take a wait-and-see approach after the way that Joe Burrow developed. And I think that's fair. I think that here's where this is coming from a logical standpoint. And obviously, I'm wrong all the time. So there's a very good chance I'm wrong about Miles Brennan, that if he truly is pegged to be the LSU starter, then he's probably going to be pretty good because, LSU obviously has had a good quarterback the last couple of years. But the reason why Burrow came is because Brennan didn't win the job the first time around. And now that Burrow's gone, I think that you are at least bringing back to mind the string of disappointing quarterbacks they had prior to Burrow. Ultimately, what I keep coming back to, and I've said over and over again, I was blown away by what Joe Brady did with the LSU offense. Once again, just logically speaking, almost all the same players in 2018, pretty good. 2019, but with an upgrade in coaching philosophy and game planning acumen, all of a sudden we're talking about setting records and being as good as possible. So now it's Scott Linehan, which was not a bad hire at all. But it's Linehan in place of Brady, new quarterback. I think I'm just going to return to a certain degree of skepticism because now it's not just the Joe Burrow era that I'm thinking about. It's sort of like the 5 years prior to that. And for most of those 5 years, the LSU quarterback play was only okay. So is this just like the luckiest occurrence in the world that they had a star on the rise like Joe Brady? I think we're about to find that out. But a really good comment. Thanks for sharing it. Leslie Cole says UGA is going all the way this year. Defense going to be a beast. Offense going to be strong. And I don't see LSU going to the SEC championship this year. Leslie, great predictions. Thanks for that. What else is going on? James Crump says LSU's a one-hit wonder. If you're an LSU fan, you have to be a little bit worried about that. Now, with Stingley and Chase and some of those guys, maybe the rising sophomore running backs are ready to step up. There's plenty of opportunity for them not to be a one-hit wonder, but if you're an LSU fan, you have to at least be a little bit worried about that. I do. What else is going on? Jacob Thompson says LSU is the Bengals of college football. Luckily, I am up to date on my 80s pop. But the Bengals, they were more than a one-hit wonder, right? Didn't they have, they had a couple songs, didn't they? I feel like they had more than one song. There were plenty of 80s bands that had just the one song, but like the Bengals had a couple. But it's a good reference, though, Jacob, a good reference. All right, let's get ready to go. A couple more we got to go. Make it good. Mark Drury says, LSU will be good this year, but to expect them to be as good as the past season would be just unrealistic. That's probably well said. This is a good question. Who is harder to replace, Coach O or Saban? Here's what I think is interesting about that, Chad, is the way in which things are going. Let's assume for just the sake of argument, I don't believe this is probably true, but let's assume for the sake of argument that Saban hangs around for a couple of more years. I think what you're seeing is, and I know I talk about this a lot, but I do find this to be fascinating, the way in which Orgeron is trying to build his program being almost the opposite of Saban. He's just more relaxed. He's more comfortable. He's funnier. He's sort of digging deep into the LSU state of Louisiana culture, whereas Nick Saban's kind of always felt like this national figure. He's a Mercedes dealership in Nashville. He's been an NFL guy before. He doesn't feel as ingrained to the state of Alabama. They recruit a lot nationally, whereas Orgeron's talking about eating like gumbo 20 times a week on the recruiting trail and things like that. He's doing things so different. It would have been almost impossible to imagine. Just take Georgia completely out of this discussion for a moment and just focus on LSU and Alabama. It would have been almost impossible to imagine a scenario where a coach could ever be as difficult to replace at his school as that Saban is at Alabama. But ultimately, finding someone to kind of do what Saban does for Alabama may be actually easier than finding someone to kind of replicate the cult of personality that Ed Orgeron's established in the state of Louisiana and at LSU. Now, he's going to keep winning at the same clip that he won this past year, but it's not inconceivable that one day he will be viewed as just as irreplaceable a figure as what Saban's been viewed at Alabama. And that's without even bringing in Georgia to the discussion. Henry Cabot Lodge checking in to let us know that the Dogs can't beat Alabama. Well, I guess that means we can all save some time and money as far as traveling over to Tuscaloosa goes this September. I'm thankful that Henry was good enough to go ahead and reveal the future to us on that. Christy, very nice reference here. The fact that Manic Monday, one of the Bengals songs, was written by Prince. Was Prince dating one of the girls in the Bengals? Is that what that was about? Am I remembering that correctly, Christy? I think I might be. Bama Boy says, and this is where people just do not give Orgeron enough credit. I love Bama Boy's comments. He's one of the opposing fans. I think that's more fun than not usually in our comment section, but he's wrong on this. He says Edo is not a good coach. Joe Brady won the ship. So Joe Brady may have been what helped LSU get over the hump against Alabama, because prior to that had not been happening. But go back and look at Orgeron's record at LSU against virtually every other category other than Alabama prior to that. SEC opponents, road games, ranked opponents. When it comes to covering the spread, winning those games, Orgeron was doing just fine. To me, those are all the measuring sticks for how good a coach is. Are you beating the ranked teams? Are you winning games on the road? Are you winning games in your conference, not stacking up, wins in the non-conference? And Orgeron was doing very well in all those categories, with the exception of Alabama. And last year they got over the hump against the Crimson Tide. But that's not the only measuring stick that matters for coaching success. And even prior to beating Alabama last year, Orgeron was doing really well in almost every other category. All right, let's get ready to go. Really good stuff. Thank you all for being here, part of our RS Andrews Cool Down. Also, make sure you check out the AJC for Atlanta News Now. Really good way to stay up to date on everything going on there. How are schools handling the coronavirus and what's kind of going on with that? You get an update on that in the AJC. Brave spring training continues in Northport, Florida. Really good profile of Brian Snicker in the AJC. And it's Thursday, which means that many of you are to think about your weekend plans, and you should be. AJC always really good at providing that. You can find out more about all of that. Stay up to date on the Atlanta News Now at ajc.com. You'll have a great day. I'll see you back here tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. We'll look forward to speaking to you then. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.